Thank you, Jeff. And you're probably wondering, like, where's all this music and stuff that we're going to be singing in response to the kind of message and where the text goes. That's going to come a little bit later or whatever. But I wanted our guys to leave this up here as a way of describing, because we talk about our vision, what we're about. We talk about the things that we want to emphasize as a church. And that green section is called community, and that means our community within the body. So we talk about seeing kingdom transformation in our lives. It has to do with our relationship with Christ. In our church, that's our community, okay? And then in the world. And as I think about one aspect of that community, I think about one of the things that we really emphasize is what we call our regroups. It's our small group ministry. And so up on the screen, I'm going to show you something, a little diagram. And I'm just curious, how many of you know what this is? Have any idea what this is? Have experienced it? Okay, very few of you. Okay, that's really interesting. Part of that is because we do this, or I should say, many of our our regroups do this, and it's called a life map. That's why I got confused with life and things like that. And so not all of them do that, but many of them do that. And so what's interesting is that what a life map is somebody puts together a story of their life, okay, from beginning to basically, current, up to date, and they create symbols and pictures and images of the things that shaped and are shaping who they are. And as you can imagine, there are, it's like your birth family has a very significant impact on who you are. You think about specific events as you're growing up, thoughts, ideas, concepts, struggles, some painful events, maybe painful relationships, but also some very positive things. And so when someone gives their life map in the context, particularly of a regroup or something like that, it does two things. Number one, for the people who are listening in, they have this wonderful opportunity of learning a lot about that person sharing. It goes deep pretty quickly. So you have this incredible gift of getting to know what moves and what shapes that particular person, which is very significant. But what it does for the person who is creating that life map, it causes them to go back and reflect and to see the hand of God, how he uses the ups and downs, how he's transformed you, the things that you struggle with and you need to turn back to him, those areas that you see God has shaped you and molded you and maybe still is doing that. So it's a very moving event because it causes, in many respects, sometimes to come back to worship the Lord with what he's done and who he is and what he's done in your life. Now, let's just say you are a part of a regroup that is doing this, and you've experienced one or two of these life maps, and you get what happens. Somebody comes with a sheet of paper, and they give you a copy, and as you sit there and you hold it, they walk you through kind of each panel or imagery as one at a time. But you kind of steal a glance down at the bottom of the page. And this person's life map is a little bit different because third panel from the end, it says today. And then the next panel, it's got like 2027 and shows like a car upside down. And you're like, well, this is interesting. And the person comes to the end of their life map and they talk about this is where I am today. And they say, oh, and then in 2027, I'm going to have a really bad car accident. I'll go on life support. But then the next picture is a picture of heaven. You go, wait. You know how you're going to die? Oh, yeah, don't you know how you're going to die? Like, no, I don't know that. But what's really cool is that, that promise that Jesus has that I go to prepare a place for you and mine's on the third floor. And you're like, well, that's kind of cool. But wait a second. You say you know how you're going to pass? If I was a part of that regroup, I'd go, sure, right. Because none of us know that, right? I don't think you know that. But you know what's interesting? God knows. He does know that. Now, by the way, this would be an interesting question when you go home today and you have a conversation maybe about the morning or whatever. I have no idea whether you have those. You should have a conversation like, would you want to know? And then, would you tell anybody else? I might ask some of you guys, would you tell somebody else? But here's the interesting thing about that. If you knew, how would that change your perspective on, let's say, 2027, those 4.5 years we have up until 2027? You'd be a little more sober about life. You'd be a little more serious about life. You'd go, I know I've got X number of years or time, whatever. And when January 1 of 2027 takes place, I'm not getting in anybody's car. But also with the sure confidence you'd have on what comes next. How would you approach life that way? Okay, I said God has your life map already done. He does. And because of that, you could have confidence, right? But what is really interesting about this is that none of us really know what that is. But God also has our world's life map. It's done. It's done. All you have to do is look in the Word. It's there already. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. The fact that God has put in Scripture many, many elements and symbols and pictures, just like somebody's life map that oftentimes does need some interpretation and understanding, and maybe is not filled in as much. But that's what we're going to be looking at today. We begin kind of this final section of the book of Daniel, and chapter 7 is really a transition between the first section and the second section. And in 7 through the end of the book, we're going to be looking at what this life map that God has put together. And what is really interesting is this. This is where it comes down to what we want to address today, and that is this. At the center of that life map, there is somebody, and his name is Jesus. And we're going to see over and over again what is being revealed and shared more and more as Scripture is being revealed, is that Jesus is the true King. That's where we're going today. Our main idea today is this, that God's people engage confidently when they know Jesus is the true King. With that in mind, let's pray. Gracious Father, as we dig into your word, we're so grateful, God, that you have revealed the things that are not known to anybody else, but is known only in the heart of God, because you reign and you rule over all things, all time, all hearts, all history. We're grateful for that, and we're grateful, God, that you revealed some of these things to us, and that we can have confidence today that despite what we see, we hear, we read about, we know who's in charge. We know who reigns. We know who is sovereign over history. And because of that, God, we can have incredible hope and really incredible confidence in what you have in store for us. So I pray, God, that you would allow everybody in this room today to hear what you want them to hear from your word. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, I said kind of chapter 7 is kind of wrapping up our series, this first part of this series. And one of the things that we do is we've talked about this idea that God's people engage. And I'm going to do a little quick summary of the first 7 chapters. Because we said God's people engage shrewdly. Then we said prayerfully in chapter 2. Chapter 3, unwaveringly. 4, boldly. 5, thoughtfully. 6, openly and obediently, and 7, we're to come in at today saying confidently. Really? I got an exercise for you. Okay. If you got your Bible, would you turn to Daniel chapter 7? Okay, and I'm going to ask this half of the room, would you open to 7 and look at verse 15? You guys over here, chapter 7, would you look at verse 28. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to kind of silently read it, then pick out the word or two that is in your translation of Daniel's response to the dreams he's about to have. Okay, everybody read through that, take a look, okay, find words or whatever. All right, I'm going to ask this group first, the verse 15. If you are ready to tell me a word, raise your hand so you get my attention. Okay, go ahead. Right. Alarmed. Pardon me? Grieved? Grieved. Stressed? Distressed. Disturbed. Terrified. Troubled? Yeah, okay. Those are all synonymous with confident, right? Not really. Okay, verse 28. Greatly alarmed. Troubled. Terrified. More synonymous with confident, right? Right? Not at all. That's interesting because what we find in Daniel is that he continues to be engaged despite what he reads. But we have an incredible advantage because we know more than Daniel knows. Okay, up on the screen, we'll show you this idea of being engaged. This is something we talk about and have mentioned over and over again. See, the reality is that when we have confidence and we know who is king, we don't have to embrace this world and be conformed to this world, nor do we just condemn the world and run away and escape. Because Jesus is the true king, we can be confident and we can be engaged in our culture. And see, the reality is there's a difference between Daniel and us. We know some things that he doesn't know. It's a part of where we stand in world history. When we talk about presenting a message on a Sunday morning, there's this process that we go through. And again, the next slide will show it. It's the reality is that we look at the context. So we look at today in Daniel chapter 7, and we want to read chapter 7 and look at what that text has to say. But the reality is Daniel 7 is a part of the whole book of Daniel, right? And there's a context there. So we've got to understand what the context is. We've got to understand historically what's taking place. What is Daniel experiencing, when and where? Secondly, what type of language is this? We're going to be getting into this prophetic language, and prophecy is obviously something about the future, but this also, you'll see strange imagery, which is what's called apocalyptic literature, which is, it's kind of strange. It's just weird. It's kind of like it needs to be revealed, which is what that word means. And then what happens is this. Because where we stand in history, because the Word of God is now complete, where before Daniel is coming right here, we now know some things that he does not know. We're going to see today, as I described before, the center of the world history and what this whole message is about is that we know who the King is. His name is Jesus. And that gives us tremendous advantage even over Daniel, who knows in part but not in whole the things that we know, which allows us then to live out our calling in this world, to be people who are engaged to see kingdom transformation. All that to say, we know Jesus is the true King. So let's come back to our main idea. The main idea is God's people engage confidently when they know that Jesus is the true King. So why can we be so confident? I'm going to talk about 4 things that are going to give us confidence. The first one is going to encompass the entire chapter, okay? So I say that as a warning because when we get to the end of the chapter, you're going to go, finally, we're done. Well, I'm going to come back and do 3 more, briefly, maybe, that we're going to highlight again. So that's kind of where we're going to go. So here we go. Why can we have the confidence? Number 1 is this. God reveals his universal plan in multiple ways to demonstrate his sovereignty. Chapter 7 is going to unfold, and it's going to remind us of chapter 2. And then we're going to see things in chapter 8, and then in 9, and then in 10, and 11, and 12, and other places in the Old Testament, and throughout the New Testament as well. We're going to see things over and over again. And one of these things that should do for us is to give us over and over confidence that God, who has predicted the future, we can look back at it now, but for Daniel, it's in the future, He knows what he's talking about. And so we can have confidence because he's demonstrated over and over again his sovereignty. With all that in mind, turn to chapter 7. Here's verse 1. Here we go. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. He's got a dream, right? Okay, so notice that it says in the first year of Belshazzar, chapter 7. Chapter 8 will start off in the third year of the king of Belshazzar. Belshazzar should be something that we're somewhat familiar with if we've been reading and following along with Daniel, because he appears in chapter 5. The only problem is in chapter 5, he dies, which tells us that in the composition of Daniel, chronology is not nearly as important as theme. Okay, here we go. Up on the screen, we're going to show you what we've described as kind of the thematic order of chapters and what they're doing in the book of Daniel for 1 through 7. Notice this. This literary structure is called a chiasm, okay? It's kind of a fun little name. But notice that chapter 2 has an A, and 7 has an A1. Chapter 3 has a B, and chapter 6 has a B1. 4 and 5 are C and C1. That's because they're parallel to each other. It's like you build this way, then you back down this way. So, I'm going to skip chapter 2, but I'm going to look at chapter 3 and chapter 6. Notice in chapter 3, God tests his servants with ungodly opposition. That would be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There's an edict from the king to bow down to the statue. They refuse to do that. That'd be disobeying God. They're thrown into a fiery furnace. They're rescued by God because of their faithfulness. Chapter 6, God tests his servant with ungodly opposition. At this time, it's Daniel. Daniel, because of an edict from the king, which says you can only pray to me, says I'm going to keep on praying like I've always done, pray to the one true God. He is then taken and thrown into a lion's den. God rescues him for his faithfulness. Okay, you see those parallels? Chapter 4 and 5, okay, God tests a proud king. He is humbled. God tests a proud king. He's not humbled. Back to chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar's dream of 4 world empires. Let me ask you this question, chapter 7. What should we expect Daniel to dream? 4 world empires. That's going to help us tremendously as we try to interpret this passage. So let's jump right in. Chapter 7, now beginning in verse 2. What's he going to declare that he saw in this dream? Chapter 2 says this. Chapter 7, verse 2 says this. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And then the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. And of course, all of us immediately read that and go, I know exactly what he's talking about. As I said before, apocalyptic literature uses all kinds of imagery. And quite honestly, you can probably read volumes and volumes of books and online articles telling you exactly who and why each one of these things mean that. Have at it. Somewhat helpful, not always helpful. So we're going to kind of bring it down to what we know and we don't know. This is what we know the first beast to be. And you'll notice that on the left side, I've identified that first beast as Babylon. How do we know that? Very simply is this, is that when Daniel does the interpretation for Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2, this time it's the 4 kingdoms are represented by a statue. He says, O King Nebuchadnezzar, that head, that golden head is you. It's Babylon. Pretty easy. We got that one. Great. Now, what's the next? What's this bear? Who is this bear? So it's a little bit more complicated. But we know that the bear is the Medo-Persian Empire. Medo-Persia grew and overcame Babylon and then advanced west and was a monumental, huge empire for a couple hundred years in the Middle East. But we know exactly why they're the Medo-Persian, because if we go back again to chapter 5, we are told when Daniel interprets the writing on the wall, and it says in verse 28, your kingdom is divided, Belshazzar, the guy we're talking about right now, your kingdom is divided and given to who? The Medes and the Persians. Well, there's got to be one of the other who's actually the king, so it's Darius who's a Mede, who's the king, okay? But then he creates this edict in chapter 6, and you'll see in verse 8 as well as verse 13, he says, I cannot change that law because it's the law of the Medes and Persians. So we know who that second kingdom is. It's the Medes and Persians. Next week, by the way, we will get to chapter 8. Chapter 8 is going to highlight the second and third, the Medes and Persians and the Greeks. Greece. As a matter of fact, that's how we know, because they're actually named in chapter 8. That makes it pretty easy. So that's why when we turn to verse 6, here we go. Here's the next two. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay, notice on the text or the screen up there that I've identified the third kingdom as Greece. Again, it's pretty easy. It's the one that follows the previous one. We know the previous one is Medo-Persia. And in chapter 8, it's actually identified. It says Greece. So we know it's Greece. But then we get to the 4th beast, and things get pretty sticky and challenging. And there's a reason why I say Roman and not Rome. Rome was next. But because of what we learn in this chapter and subsequent chapters, we can't just say Rome, because Rome lasted roughly 1,500, 1,600 years, but they're not around anymore, and there's still more things that have to happen out of this 4th beast. And I'm going to start losing you. I'm going to start glazing over about half the crew right now. So let me just pause for a moment and say, why is this important? Why is it important to kind of identify and to look back at what Daniel was looking forward to? It gives us confidence in God's promise. I believe God put in his word for us to look back and go, he knows what he's doing. He's in control. And we can have confidence in his word. But also, our burdens are a little bit different. I don't know how many of you pay close attention to geopolitics, things that are going on around the world right now. But consider for this for a moment. What has happened in the last several months around the world? North Korea has shot missiles over Japan. China has shot missiles over Taiwan. Our president has declared that we would come to their rescue if there was an invasion there. Iran continues to enrich uranium, most likely, so they could develop a nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, they're supplying suicide drones to Russia for the sake of that war that's taking place, Russia-Ukraine. Putin has declared that we've annexed these now territories, and they are now Russian territories, and so they will be defended in the same way the motherland would be, which would be, if necessary, nukes. So you might go, whoa, this world is messed up, and where's it going? But I want to tell you this. This world will not end by a decision of Putin's. It's not going to happen that way. God is in control. He is. He is in control. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about what's going on. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be engaged in injustice and defense and all those type of things. I don't mean that at all. What I'm saying is that God is in control. We have assurance of that. And he continues to prove that he's in control. And he declares things like his world map, his world life map, to remind us he is in control. So now let's talk about why I say Roman. Why I say Roman. Number one is this. It follows Greece, which is a pretty easy one. But also, like I mentioned before, that it must be representative. In prophecy, there's oftentimes an immediate fulfillment and then a final fulfillment. There's things that are taking place that are descriptive with what Rome did, and then our type look like what Rome looks like. Okay, here we go. I know, it's complicated. Verse 8. Verse 8 says this, I consider the horns. Remember, there's horns in this as a part of, there's 10 horns as a part of this final kingdom. I consider the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which the 3 of the first horns were plucked by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Speaking great things appears 3 times like that in this passage, which we'll get to. We understand, as we unpack this, these are boastful, they're also blasphemous things. If you notice, what I've done is I've identified him as the Antichrist. This is the Antichrist. This is what people make books over and movies and things like that, right? It's real. And so what happens is that as we look at this horn, okay, we have to get more and more details filled in from chapters 7 through 12, plus other Old Testament passages and many New Testament passages. Some of them will highlight, but probably some of you will be prompted to read more and more and more. Okay, but I want you to notice this. As you described and told me how Daniel felt, these things are growing within him as he sees and he reads these things. But then what happens is this. Daniel describes it this way. As I looked, his attention is turned elsewhere. He continues to look at this vision, but his attention turns elsewhere. Verse 9, look at this. Thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. Okay, so in pop culture, there's the man upstairs, and he's kind of old and decrepit with white gray hair, right? That's not what this means. Ancient of Days does mean he's eternal. But when you see his clothing was white as snow and the hair of his head like pure wool, it's his holiness, it's his purity, it's his power on display. But notice how that follows then. His throne was of fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. Verse 10, a steam of fire issued and came out from before him. Listen to this. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. That gives us an indication of when this is going to take place. This is the reference of the final judgment. But what is interesting is that it says the court sat in judgment and the books were opened. In these books, as described in Scripture, is everything that has ever happened, every thought you've ever had, every action you've ever done. And for some of you, that could be absolutely terrifying, because there's a judgment coming. But you understand, there are those of us who have trusted in Christ. And so what's been blotted out of our record is any sin paid for by Jesus. But there are many that is not the case. Verse 11, it continues. And again, for what Daniel's experiencing, he's seeing this injustice by these beasts and this horn. His attention is turned and drawn to the Ancient of Days, God the Father, as he declares what's going to happen, and the courts are sitting in judgment, the books are open, and he says, then I looked then because of the sound of the great words, these flattering, these blasphemous, these boastful words that the horn was speaking. He turns back and he sees what's going to happen to him. And as I looked, the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. If you want to know more about that, you go to Revelation chapter 13, verse 5. Then you also read Revelation 19. As I said, just like somebody's life map, there are symbols, and we can't quite comprehend them. But almost like as a painter paints something, as it's being filled in, it becomes more and more and more clear. And so that's what's going to happen. We're going to see things become more and more clearly. But Daniel's presenting this idea of what's going to take place. We come to verse 13. Again, attention then is drawn back. And Daniel says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, and that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. I got to tell you, for me, it's like this is the centerfold of Scripture. I want to point out two things. We're going to come back to this later, but I want to point out two things. Like the Son of Man. Like 80 times in the Gospels, Jesus identifies himself as the Son of Man. More than any other way that he identifies himself, it's the Son of Man. But look at this. What we see in this indication, it says, with the clouds of heaven, and it says, Jesus is presented to the Ancient of Days, and then it was given to him. It's like, he sit at my right hand, and I'm now going to give you all authority, that you would reign, and it's your kingdom that will be an everlasting kingdom. It's the culmination of history and the establishment of God's visible, tangible, eternal kingdom. What is fascinating is this. The last week of Jesus' life here on earth, I believe it's on a Tuesday, his disciples, he and his disciple go up to the Mount of Olives, and they looked to the west, and there's a valley in between, and they can see the temple, and they can look at the city of Jerusalem. It's called the Sermon on the Mount of Olives, okay, at that sermon. And he tells them a bunch of things that are significant. In Matthew chapter 25, 31 through 32, this is what Jesus says. He says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, it's right there. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. By the way, that's exactly what we will read in Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. There's no surprises here, people. God is reigning, and he's ruling, and he is overseeing all of history. But the reality is that we're not there yet. We're not there yet. Not every knee has confessed, nor tongue confessed or knee bowed to Jesus. Here we go. Verse 15. Okay, then, as for me, Daniel says, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These four great beasts are four kings who shall arise out of the earth. Again, four kings representing these four kingdoms. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. What a great promise. We're going to come back to that. Verse 19, then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things. There's that great things again. And that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of the Days came and judgment was given for the saints, on behalf of the saints of the Most High. And time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. He goes on to say, verse 23, then he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth. Again, part of that idea that there's more to it than just Rome, but in the spirit of Rome. And it'll trample it down and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down the 3 kings. Now we're going to learn more about that Antichrist. So here we go, verse 25. I'm going to point out 4 things that describe him. He shall, number 1, speak words against the Most High. What's that referring to? I've already mentioned it a number of times. It's this boastful things. What we discover later on, it's blasphemous words. Paul will tell us that this guy who Paul says is the man of lawlessness, okay, he will come on the scene in the world. And 2 Thessalonians 2:4 tells us that he will be proclaiming himself to be God. And people rally around him. And most likely, he won't call himself the Antichrist. That would be bad marketing, right? So he won't be known as that. Okay? But he will gather a following, and he will proclaim himself to be God. The second thing happens is this. It says, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. That wear out is like, this imagery is like a garment that gets rubbed and torn, whatever. Now, if you're thinking ahead and you're one of those people that think about the end times and you have a position on tribulation, rapture, anybody got an opinion on those things? The question is, if you have a position where the church is taken out, raptured out of the tribulation, why would those people be worn out, whatever? Well, no matter where you are positionally on the tribulation, there will be people who will either come to Christ or still be around. That's where that's coming from. But this is clearly the indication of the tribulation, 7-year tribulation period that we see the rest of Scripture. And then it says this. Notice what happens next. And again, the middle of verse 25, and shall think to change the times and the laws. To a Jewish person, that times and laws has to do with the seasonal festivals, like Passover and things like that. He will come in and reestablish different types of worship. This is what's called the abomination, the abomination of desolation. We will read in chapter 9, 11, and 12, the abomination that leads to desolation, and those are fun words to say. But what does it mean? It will be, an abomination is something terrible and drastic, defiling, making something desolate, making something no longer a place of worship. So that's a promise given. Notice this, that same sermon, Jesus out on the Mount of Olives, one chapter earlier, Matthew 24:15 says this, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place. That's what's coming. See, this Antichrist will desecrate true worship and make him the central focus. None of this takes God by surprise. At the end of that verse, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Once again, it takes a little bit of work to figure this thing out. References here and there. But basically, time is understood to be a year times 2 years, and half a time, half a year, which means there's 3.5 years. We'll read more about that in 9:27, 12:7, Revelation 12:6, and 14. There you go. Lots of stuff there to look at. But essentially, it's a 3.5 year period during the middle of that tribulation. And you go, man, you're losing me, Greg. I say all this to remind you, this is in God's word, to remind us to have confidence that he is in control. Verse 26 and 27, and we're getting close to the end. But the court shall sit in judgment. Again, Daniel is reminded of where this is all going. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey them. We're reminded again that because we know what's going to take place, it's serious stuff, but we can have confidence where this is going to go. And then the chapter ends where we mentioned earlier, verse 28. Here's the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. And we know he continued to remain engaged in the politics of where he lived. So now, I want to come back again and look at 3 different small sections to reinforce something that we've already read, but to remind us about why we can have great confidence. And number 1 is this: God reveals his plan to judge the world. Look at verse 9 through 12 once again. I said this takes place where the Ancient of Days has taken his seat, and it says the court sat in judgment and the books were opened, and as a result of that, it reminds us of this. It gives us confidence that God has absolute knowledge of all things. He knows it all. Confidence in his absolute power and authority. And the confidence that there is justice coming. There will be complete and righteous and holy justice coming. And God will make all things right. Secondly, God reveals his plan for his saints. Look at verse 18. It says there, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. If you are in this room and you have bowed the knee to Christ, you're called a saint. That word saint is called a holy one. You've been declared righteous and holy by what Jesus has done for you. And this promise that is given to you is this, that you will receive the kingdom with him. Now look at verse 21 and 22. As I look, the horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. There are some who are going to suffer, and some who do suffer and will suffer. But it says, until the Ancient of Days come and judgment was given for the saints. He's fighting on our behalf. And the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Going down to verse 27. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms of the whole earth shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. It says there, but I want to insert the word our, because it is ours. Our kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey them. That's where we're going. You see, when we talk about gospel identity, we talk about who Jesus is, what he's done for us, and then what he's done for us in making us his. That we essentially are co-heirs with Christ, and we will reign with him. Isn't that amazing? That's where all this is going. And last but not least, let's center on where this all needs to camp out. See, God reveals his plan for Jesus, the Son of Man. Look again at verse 13 and 14. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like the Son of Man. Now, what I want you to do is keep your finger, if you have a Bible, keep your finger in 7:14, but also turn to Mark chapter 14. I want to show you something. We got done a few months ago wrapping up Mark, and I remember thinking about processing, speaking on Daniel and us going through Daniel and how often I saw Son of Man over and over again. And it's taken me a long time to find Mark. Come on, here we go. Mark chapter 14. But I want to show you something in verse 61. Verse 61, what's taking place is that Jesus is on trial. It's the night that he's betrayed. He's about to be crucified the very next day. And it says in verse 61, but he remained silent, that means Jesus, and he made no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Listen to this. And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Go back to 7:14. And behold, the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient Days and was presented before him to sit on his right hand. And to him what was given? Glory and kingdom, that all peoples and nations and language shall serve him. His dominion is everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. With as much confidence that we know Jesus came once, he's coming again. And everyone will know that Jesus is the true King. I'm going to ask the band to come on up here. And this is one of the reasons why we decided to not do a bunch of songs up front, but to do them now. Because there's every reason in the world to celebrate, to praise God that Jesus is the true King. So I invite you to stand as the band leads for a couple songs here.